Good morning. Welcome to A is for Authors. We have with us today Miss Star Sanders, who is a poet, and she lives in Polk County, and she is going to answer some questions for us today. So, Mrs. Sanders, welcome to A is for Authors. Thank you for being with us today. Before I get started with my question, I want to say, first of all, I used to work at a high school, and this was the most darling little young lady I ever met, and she was so talented, and I'm just so proud of what she's become. So thank you for being with us, and thank you for writing this great book, and I just want you to tell the audience a little bit about you.
Yes, ma'am. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and I'm definitely delighted to be here. A little bit about myself. Right now, I'm a middle school teacher. I teach PE actually, but I went to college to major in communications, so I became a writer. And I always did creative writing. So I've been a poet since I was in the 7th grade. I've been writing ever since. So when I went to college, that is what I wanted to pursue. And I chose to, when I went to Bethune-Cookman, which actually Ms. Rose is the reason that I went to Bethune-Cookman in the first place. I honestly had no idea I was going to go to college at all. It was never a real plan of mine because none of my mother's children went to college. And when she brought it up to me, it kind of started making me want to go. And she honestly helped me get into school, and that was my first real experience, honestly, of being around people of my own, culture, to be honest. So that's how it all started.
Well, I just want to let you know you are the third Wildcat that we've had on our show. We had a music director from Fort Meade High School. He's a Wildcat. And our last author that we featured was a Wildcat. So go Wildcats. BCU is on the map. And so that started you out because you went to a historically black college. And I think that was reflected in your book, that you learned about black history when you went to a historically black college. And we know that Bethune-Cookman is a college that tries to make sure that its students are well prepared. And so tell us a little bit about your experience at Bethune-Cookman College.
When I first went to Bethune-Cookman, it's funny because although I'm black, it was a culture shock because growing up in Polk County, it's not as diverse as Bethune-Cookman was. So with it being a historically black college, it honestly, for the first time, really made me proud to be a black woman. And I know that may sound crazy, but I just never really was around those type of experiences and influences. So being there, I was only actually there for 1 year, but that 1 year changed my life because then it started teaching me how to dig deeper into my history and the way I wanted people to perceive me and the education that I could eventually pass out to the other people around me.
Well, I listened to what your response were, and I'm thinking about what I see in your book. Now, your book is called I Am, and it tells about so many people. And so that meant that even though your major was communications, you had to do a lot of historical research. And so, I like history too. So I knew you were accurate in your descriptions of all those people. And I said, she finally liked the library because she had to read all about those people. So tell us how you went about your approach to writing your poetry.
When I first started thinking about how I wanted to write this series, it's interesting because I didn't want to write on the same typical people that most students learn every month. Especially growing up in Polk County, we really didn't focus that much on black history. And when we did, it was on Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, maybe George Washington Carver, but the students, they can't tell me any other people, like, or they don't really know their history. They'll say Martin Luther King freed the slaves, or I'm like, that's not at all accurate. And so I wanted to choose the people for my first book to be not as typical. And so the research aspect of it took a longer time because I had to go and try it. It's hard to fact check a lot of things from those times. Like they didn't have birth certificates. It was, and even in my book, if I don't know their actual birth date, it'll say about 1875. So just being able to check many different sources. So yes, I did have to, rely on the library for that and a lot of research, obviously the internet, because it's so many different depictions out there. So being able to line things up properly was probably the hardest aspect of the book. And I just took each person and wrote a poem because poetry is my first love. And so it's like I just took their biography and made a poem out of it.
Well, as I was reading through the book, I noticed that poetry was your first love. And the person you wrote about 4 pages on, do you know who that was? What
4
poet?
pages.
Yeah, 4 pages. Her poem was about
Probably Maya Angelou.
Yes. So I say, okay, I know she likes poetry, so she's dedicated all these pages to Dr. Angelo, and so that I thought that was so sweet because I know that from when you were a little girl that you really liked poetry, and some of your poetry was featured in the Polk County Poetry Contest booklet, and so that I was very proud of to know that you were in that and that you were still pursuing your craft. And I know that once you left Bethune-Cookman College, where did you come? Where did you go?
So after I left Bethune-Cookman, I went to Southeastern University. And it was another culture shock. It's like going to a historically black college, and it just felt so good to be in that environment, honestly. And then coming back to Southeastern, I honestly struggled there. And one of my professors had me retake his class because some of my head was not on straight. And he said, you have to take one of my classes. So I looked at all the classes that he was offering. And one of the classes was African American literature. And it was my professor was a white guy. So I was like, oh gosh, this is going to be interesting. So I took that class, and it's like I was the teacher of the class. I was in front of the class literally 60 to 70% of the time. I was the reader, I was the narrator, I was literally the teacher of the class. And that really changed things for me as well, and it just made me appreciate African American literature even more. Like a lot of things I didn't know, I was able to learn. And then I realized I really love teaching people about my history. And so at the time I didn't know I was going to write this book, but that was probably also a part of that gateway that allowed me to reach this point of just the appreciation of all of these different people.
Now, you said that being at Southeastern, that was a gateway to African American history or whatever. So I noted that this is volume 1, and you label it volume 1. So tell us, how long did it take you to write volume 1, and when is volume 2 coming?
Well, when I first started writing volume 1, it probably took me around 2 years to write it. Not because it took that long, but stopping and going and refocusing and being a mother and being a teacher and just working, not making excuses, but that's honestly what happened. Honestly, being quarantined, dealing with the COVID-19 quarantine, it actually helped me sit down and just finish everything. I was like, well, I can't go anywhere. And so that's honestly how I started. Okay, I was honestly watching Netflix series, and I stopped watching TV because I was like, you know what? I just watched a whole series on Netflix and my book is not finished. So I turned my TV off and I would not look at anything. I still don't even, now it's like a habit where I don't really watch TV. It is very rare. I can go months without watching TV now, which as before I needed to watch my shows. But now it's like if I'm wasting time watching TV, which is entertaining, don't get me wrong, nothing wrong with watching TV, but I just felt like I could be accomplishing my goals instead. And so reading reading of all these different people and writing, and I took me through 7 or 8 different edits in different companies to help me edit, and seeing what I wanted to edit or didn't want to edit. So it took about 2 years, but now I know the process. So now I'm writing volume 2, and by the end of the year for sure I should have volume 2 published.
Well, that sounds wonderful. So I'm glad you setting a goal for yourself, and I think that the book is appropriate for all ages. So you got 1 going now, you'll have 2, and like you said, that many times the kids aren't taught. Well, let me rephrase that. You said that you wanted Black History to be a part every day and not just during the month of February. And so many times in our curriculums that we have, we don't see a lot of history being taught in that way. I know that the curriculum does now try to integrate it a little bit more than it used to during the time that you were growing up. And so kids may have passages about outstanding African Americans. And so, but I think that this as a resource, and starting with I Am, and if someone reads your book, it puts you as if you were talking and you're just telling your story. Each of those passages of poetry, as they talk about a individual, you are acting as if you are those individuals. And so what a wonderful way to teach history, because you put yourselves into place. Now, I was really, really touched by the part about Emmett Till, and because he lived such a short life, and he didn't. I mean, so that was a touching moment as I read his poem. But I think that this will be an instrument that if you think your kid is not learning about his history and they need to know about their history, or if you want your children to be exposed to what happened with individuals, then you would probably want them to take a look at your book, because it's written in the language that they speak. And I know that you have done rap videos and whatever with kids and all of those things like that. Is there any, are you still doing that?
Well, I don't rap as much anymore, but I did a Benjamin Banneker rap video. It's actually more so of a slideshow with me rapping behind it, and it is on YouTube. It's called I don't even know what it's called actually. It's the Benjamin Banneker rap. If you look that up on YouTube, you can find it. And honestly, I just took the poem that's in my book and rapped it, and put a beat behind it, and that's how I did that. With my book, it's interesting because I was thinking about history, and what makes history relatable is being able to actually relate to it and put myself in those different individual shoes. And that was the most interesting part, because that took a lot of research that I can grasp how they felt in that moment. And it's some of it would make me cry, or it's like I would really get sucked into writing some of these, because it's like, this is how Ida B. Wells felt, and I know she felt that way because I listened to her many speeches. I would see how, okay, let me read her writing. And so that's how I had to engulf myself into each individual poem. And it's really interesting. And the Emmett Till poem, his poem is the only poem in this book that is actually more, I put myself in his mother's shoes. And like you say, he lived such a short life, but being able to see how she felt through all these different interviews, I felt like I wanted to dedicate that particular poem to her, because she's the one who tells his story until the day she passed on. But it was, that was touching. All of them are touching, but that's the one that's probably the most gut-wrenching for people to actually listen to, because history hurts. When you really sit back and read or listen, it hurts. And a lot of the situations we go through now, they still hurt sometimes. So just being able to teach different people about our history and teaching them to start loving themselves, and it doesn't mean that you have to hate others because you love history. And in school, the curriculum, like you say, is trying to somewhat get better in certain schools, and some schools they still don't. And Black History was not meant to be Black History Month. It was only supposed to be that way for a short while and then be engulfed into all of history. But we have still yet to reach that aspect. We're not there yet, quite. So hopefully with this book, you can be able to read at any point of the year, because that's who we are, as a people. And this is the history. This didn't all happen in 1 month. And so being able to teach people history throughout the year is really important to me.
So as you were saying, you put yourself in those situations so that you could have the words. You're a great wordsmith, so you can feel your emotion in those poems that you've written. And I think that I encourage others to take a look at your book. It is available on Amazon.
Yes, ma'am.
And I learned about your book through 2 of your students from one of your schools, and they said, they were mentioning the name Star, and I said, who is Star? I said, I know a Star, I only know one. And so they would say, she wrote a book on Black history. And so apparently they've examined the book, and they're very proud of your work. And I'm sure that if they listen to the poem that you rap, those kids who want to rap can see what things that they can come up with, and also do a little bit more investigation. So these poems are just a segue to learning more about history and knowing what happened. And so I applaud you for your book and congratulate you for the volume 1. Look forward to volume 2, and encourage others to go and find out more about your stories that are in the book and about you in particular. Now, is there anything else you want to share with us that I haven't said? Because, like I said, I've known you since you were a little girl, and I'm glad to see you grown up to be a creative and industrious young lady with a family, and know the direction that you want to do. And I think it was reflected in one of your poems. You said, don't let the past define you, but you move forward no matter what, and always set a goal. That's kind of paraphrasing, but you probably know every word you wrote. So, but anyway, let me give you this moment to share anything that we haven't said.
Well, actually, that's funny that you mentioned that, because that's exactly the way I feel. In middle school, I did not do the best in school. It was, I did just enough to get by. And one of my principals, actually at George Jenkins High School, Miss Carolyn Williams, she came up to me and she had a real heartwarming moment with me. And she was like, don't allow our ancestors to die in vain. They didn't have the opportunity to be in school the way you are and have the education that you have. And so she was like, you got to do something with it. And from that moment on, I made the honor roll. Literally from just that moment itself taught me to have more pride in myself, as a Black woman. But that's for all students as well. But that was my particular story. And so I would like to share with kids, you don't have to be defined by your past. Regardless of the environment you grow up in. Like I said, I'm number 4 out of 5 children of my mother's, and I'm the first one to go to college. My brother and sisters, they're doing fine, but I was the first one to actually take that extra step. And now I'm an author, I'm a teacher. I know some of my other teachers are probably surprised, but you know, it started something for me that now I just want to educate more people, more children, allow them into my world so they can see that you can still be successful.
Well, we thank you for your story. We thank you for letting us share your book. And we're going to put up when you're going to be at the Fort Meade Public Library sharing your story with others. And so that's why we'll follow our interview. So we appreciate you, we congratulate you, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the world of literature. Thank you for being with us.
And thank you so much for having me.